There's something I've noticed about getting older. It's not just that your circle gets smaller, it's that you start realizing some people were never really there for you in the first place. And that realization doesn't come all at once. It shows up quietly, and usually after something small. There was a man I heard about not long ago. He was in his mid-70s, living alone after his wife passed. Nothing unusual about his life. He kept a small routine: morning coffee, a bit of gardening, television in the evening. Quiet, steady. At some point, a young woman from his neighborhood started stopping by. At first, it seemed harmless. She'd bring something small: cookies, a quick hello, help with his phone. He didn't think much of it. If anything, he appreciated the company. It had been a while since anyone had taken the time to sit with him like that. Over time, the visits became more regular. Then the conversations shifted. She started asking for small favors, a little money here and there. Nothing that felt alarming on its own. He didn't want to make it awkward. And if he's honest, he didn't want the visits to stop. By the end of the year, she was gone. So was a noticeable part of his savings. What stayed with him wasn't just the money. It was the realization that he had seen it happening, little by little, and chose not to stop it. Not because he didn't understand, because he didn't want to lose the connection. That kind of story isn't rare. It shows up in different forms. Sometimes it's a neighbor. Sometimes it's family. Sometimes it's someone who suddenly reappears after years of silence, talking about how much they've missed you. On the surface, it looks like reconnection, but if you stay with it long enough, you start to notice a pattern. They need something. And that puts older adults in a difficult position that people don't talk about very often. Because by that stage in life, most people aren't trying to prove anything anymore. They're not looking for conflict. They're not interested in arguing over small things. After a lifetime of responsibilities, there's a natural shift toward keeping things calm. That's where the problem begins. When someone pushes a little, it's easier to let it slide. When something feels slightly off, it's easier to ignore it. When a request crosses a line, it's easier to say yes than to deal with the discomfort of saying no. Not because they don't see it, because they don't want to turn it into something. And underneath all of that, there's something else. Loneliness doesn't always show up in obvious ways. It's not always about being completely alone. Sometimes it's just the absence of being needed, or the feeling that you're no longer at the center of anyone's world. Children grow up, their lives fill up, conversations get shorter, visits become occasional, and slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, the role you once had begins to change. That shift is harder than most people admit. So when someone shows interest, even if it's inconsistent, even if it comes with conditions, it's easy to hold on to it a little longer than you should. Not because you don't recognize the imbalance, because part of you still wants the connection. There was another woman, late 70s, living in a small apartment. She had always been the kind of person people relied on, the one who showed up, the one who helped without being asked twice. Over time, her place became somewhere people stopped by often. Coffee, conversation, small favors. It looked like she was surrounded by people. But if you asked her how she felt at the end of the day, she would have told you she was exhausted. No one was asking how she was doing. No one was noticing when she needed something. They came, they took what they needed, and they left. She didn't say anything for a long time. Not because she didn't notice, because she didn't want to come across as unkind. That word, unkind, carries a lot of weight for people who grew up being taught to put others first. So instead of saying no, she adjusted, she made space, she kept giving. Until one day, she realized something simple. The more available she was, the less she was actually seen. That's a difficult place to arrive at, because it forces you to look at relationships differently. Not through history, not through obligation, but through what is actually happening in the present. Who shows up when you need them? Who listens? Who respects your time? Who only appears when there's something to gain. That kind of clarity doesn't come all at once. It builds slowly. You start noticing how certain conversations leave you feeling drained, how some people talk at you, not with you, how certain visits feel more like an obligation than a connection. And eventually, a question starts forming in the background. Why does this feel heavier than it should? That question changes things. Because once you start asking it, it becomes harder to ignore the answer. The truth is, a lot of older adults are not being taken advantage of because they don't understand what's happening. They understand more than people think. But there's a lifetime of habits behind their decisions. Keeping the peace, avoiding conflict, being the reliable one. Those habits don't disappear overnight. At some point, though, something shifts. It might be after one too many uncomfortable conversations, or after realizing that certain people only reach out when they need something, or simply from feeling tired in a way that rest doesn't fix. And slowly, without making a big announcement about it, they begin to change how they respond. They don't answer every call. They don't agree to every request. They take a little longer before saying yes. Sometimes they don't explain themselves at all. From the outside, it can look like they've become distant, but from the inside, it often feels like they've become more honest, more aware of what things cost them. Because at that stage of life, energy is different. Time feels different. The ability to recover from emotional strain isn't the same as it used to be. One difficult interaction can stay with you longer. One uncomfortable situation can take more out of you. So the question becomes less about being nice and more about being careful. Careful with time, careful with energy, careful with who gets access to you. That doesn't mean shutting people out. It means paying attention. Not every relationship needs to continue just because it has a long history. Not every request needs to be honored. Not every person who shows up deserves the same level of access. Those are quiet realizations, but they change everything. Because once you see the pattern, it's hard to go back to not seeing it. And when that happens, something else becomes clear too. Being alone is not always the problem people think it is. There's a difference between being alone and being surrounded by people who leave you feeling empty. For some, stepping back from certain relationships doesn't create loneliness. It creates space. Space to think clearly. Space to feel steady again. Space where you're not constantly adjusting yourself to accommodate someone else. That kind of space can feel unfamiliar at first, but over time it starts to feel like relief. And maybe that's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Not every connection is worth keeping. Not every presence adds something meaningful. And not every relationship deserves to continue unchanged just because it always has. Sometimes getting older isn't about losing people. It's about finally understanding which relationships were never really balanced to begin with. And once you see that, you start moving differently. Quieter, more deliberate, less reactive. Not because you care less, because you understand more.